Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Royal Opera House, both to the audience here in the Claw studio upstairs and also to everyone watching worldwide on our live stream on the Opera House's YouTube channel. I'm Sarah Moore-Peach, and for tonight's Insight, we're going behind the scenes as the Royal Opera and the Royal Ballet prepare for Javier De Frutos' new production of Philip Glass's dance opera, Les Enfants Terribles, which will be on stage at the Barbican from the 27th to the 29th of January, and is part of celebrations happening across the world for Philip Glass's 80th birthday. Les Enfants Terribles is the last of his Cocteau trilogy, which he wrote in 1996, and it's based on a novel and subsequent film of the same name by Jean Cocteau. And it tells a very strange story of two siblings, Paul and Elizabeth, or Lisa, who live together in an isolated room. We're in the room now. And as they then grow up, they become so immersed in each other and the dark fantasies of their imaginations and their game that they lose all sense of reality. So tonight we are delighted that Javier De Frutos and dancers and singers are going to be in rehearsal. We also have the conductor of the production, Timothy Burke, to introduce us to the music of Philip Glass and to this unique work. And I'll be talking to Javier and to Timothy and also to Royal Ballet principals Edward Watson and Sinead Yanovsky about the process of choreographing this work. If you're watching on our YouTube live stream, we would love to hear from you during the course of tonight's Insight, so do please tweet us. You can use the hashtag #LesEnfants. So, to get straight on with it, please welcome director and choreographer Javier De Frutos. Javier, welcome.
Thank you.
It feels wonderful to be so close to this
we
bed.
can sit on the bed.
Can we sit on the bed
yes,
for a moment? Talk to me about what we're about to see, because you're going to do a piece of rehearsal first, and we'll come back to more rehearsal later.
Yes.
What's this scene?
So this is probably what I felt that it was going to be most important, is to kind of show the process of how you put a work that is called by Philip a dance opera, which means that you have to, as I said, you have to bake the crust first, and then you put the filling, and then you put the top, etc., etc. You can, and sometimes you have to cook 2 or 3 things at the same time. So in the process of doing this just doesn't happen in one day. What we're going to see is a really beautiful moment of narration that happens in Act 2. The narration will tell itself what the scene is, because the narration happens to be in English. It's a very curious work in which the work is in French, but it has a narration coming from one of the characters in English, and somehow it's very effective. Somehow I feel that is sort of Philip Glass, the real American in Paris, trying to find his way, his presence, almost like a Hitchcock cameo. In a strange way, so I'm very attached to it. A few years ago, I was involved in a work at the National Theatre with a musical called London Road, which is now known to be a verbatim work, and probably the biggest evolution of the change of the genre. And during that work, I kind of learned what the word verbatim meant, which was to go very exact in detail with as it was said, with the same accent, the same inflection. In developing the movement for that work, and then when it was transferred to the film, I had to use something similar with the movement, which ended up being dance verbatim.
So you're actually calling this verbatim
we call
style?
We call him verbatim
okay.
style, and it's going to be very clear, but I'm going to tell you how it happens. And my both dancers have been terrific in doing this. It takes as long as it takes to create, because it means that they also need to know the text as well as the narrator.
Okay, let's see it.
Yeah, let's see it.
Shall we see it?
So
okay.
What we're going to do, the three stages, I'm going to do the 3 stages with each one of the elements. I'm going to show you the material in itself in silence. And then after we do that, we're going to see it accompanied just with the narration. And then we are going to see it again with the narration, the dance, and the music. Now, the reason why we do this is because the movement by itself is completely abstract. When the narration accompanies the movement, your brain has absolutely no choice but try to find connections with the movement, and it's going to reveal itself when you actually see it. So let's have a look. Jonathan Goddard and Thomasine Gulshek. Great. So, now, in all honesty, the movement by itself in silence is the stuff that has kept me going to contemporary dance performances. So I always try to find some level of interest, but this is the very first layer. It's completely detailed. The movement comes from absolutely nowhere. There's no connection. It's not trying to follow the words. So this was created before the narration came in.
No sooner was Paul stationed amid the nondescript decor of this deserted film set than he became a wary cat. Nothing escaped him. He'd come to a halt, circle, sniff the furniture, unable to connect this bedroom to the schoolyard or the fascinating moonlight to the snow, but finding there a profound sense of déjà vu from a past life. His pride was suffering. Agathe had conquered him, and instead of understanding that he loved her, that she held power over him through her gentleness, and that he should let her conquer him, he struggled against what he believed to be his demon, an evil doom. In the gallery, there were folding screens from a winter garden that had never seen the light of day. They were, like everything else in there, inconvenient, absurd, uncomfortable. Paul dragged them across the room, opened them out, and made them into his ramparts, a sort of forbidden city. An old rug completed his masterpiece. He rolled himself up in his blankets and slept. His former bedroom from the Rue Montmartre began to recreate itself piece by piece in this hall of stars. The lamp, the blanket, the bed, the chair, the bottles, the treasure drawer, and the bust with a moustache.
Great. And now let's hear it with music.
So this is scene 14 from Figure 9. sooner was Paul stationed amid the nondescript decor of this deserted film set than he became a wary cat. Nothing escaped him. He'd come to a halt, circle, sniff the furniture, unable to connect this bedroom to the schoolyard or the fascinating moonlight to the snow, but finding there a profound sense of déjà vu from a past life. His pride was suffering. Agathe had conquered him, and instead of understanding that he loved her, that she held power over him through her gentleness, and that he should let her conquer him, he struggled against what he believed to be his demon, an evil doom. In the gallery, there were folding screens from a winter garden that had never seen the light of day. They were, like everything else in there, inconvenient, absurd, uncomfortable. Paul dragged them across the room, opened them out and made them into his ramparts, a sort of forbidden city. An old rug completed his masterpiece. He rolled himself up in his blankets and slept. His former bedroom from the Rue Montmartre began to recreate itself piece by piece in this hall of stars. The lamp, the blanket, the bed, the chair, the bottles, the treasure drawer, and the bust with the moustache.
Great. That's that. This is only a quarter of the room. So there are actions happening there that are on the same verbatim but with different movement, and action happening here with Jula, who's our singer, Paul, our baritone, and Clemmy playing Agathe. So the information is, you see the information fractured and seen in 4 different corners of the room. This is just a tiny fragment.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Javier, and thank you also to all of our performers, Jonathan Goddard and Thomasin Gulgech, and the pianists, Kate Shipway, Grant Green, James Hendry, and also Paul Kurievich doing the narration there. And we're going to have a little bit more rehearsal later on this evening from Javier and the dancers and musicians. So, as I mentioned earlier, this production is part of worldwide celebrations for Philip Glass's 80th birthday. And this piece comes from his Cocteau trilogy, which he wrote in the first half of the 1990s. Actually, the operas for which he's better known are the much earlier trilogy of Einstein on the Beach, Satyagraha, and Akhenaten. But we'd like to find out a little bit more about Philip Glass's music and how he uses it in this dance opera, for which, please welcome conductor Timothy Burke.
Thank you very much. So let's have a look into the music of this piece. Glass is the most performed living composer of opera in the world today. And yet a year ago, I personally didn't really know very much at all about his operas beyond the names, Einstein on the Beach, Akhenaten, and a few salient facts. Getting to know this piece and some of his other works has been quite a revelation for me. And I'd like to share some of the things I've discovered with you. So let's start with the music. Let's have a little listen to how it all begins. So that pounding insistence and almost gothic darkness to the music, it kind of feels to me almost like the opening credits of a stormy 1940s film noir. Let's take it apart and see how it works. So the main element is this obsessive repeated figure. But what gives it that real darkness and extra tension is the way that Glass sweeps through a succession of 4 different harmonies, which are increasingly dissonant against this repeating figure. So this is figure 5. Here's the first change. Now the first real clash. He turns the screw tighter. Suddenly a tender melody. Is answered in the bass line. So it's interesting that when I tell people that I'm working on this piece, more often than not, I get a very strong reaction to that. Glass says himself that when he premiered Einstein on the Beach, Satyagraha, in the late 70s, it made some people extremely angry. He thinks people felt he had somehow sinned against music. These strong reactions that I still encounter right now amongst the professional music community as well just made me more interested in this piece and Glass and his other works. What was it about these pieces that had got people so worked up? I think one of the first things you hear about Philip Glass is that he's a minimalist. He writes minimalism. He doesn't really like that label himself. I think the issue with the word is it only really describes half of what he is doing. The style that made him famous is based on repetition and change, and the changes are what we tend not to focus on when we're talking about his music. Let's listen to the beginning of scene 3. So in opera, we expect music to be telling us a story or revealing the feelings of one of the characters, that something is being told to us through the music. Well, that's exactly what this music doesn't do. It doesn't tell us a story. What it does do is evolve change by change with its own logic and its own patterns. It challenges us to listen in a new way. Let's hear it again and really locate those changes. So we start with Grant just playing solo. Then we hear James. Now we hear Kate's right hand. Now her left hand. Oh no, wait, not yet, sorry, my mistake. Now it's her left hand. You notice James has stopped. Now he's back with something new. So abandoning the idea that music can or should tell us a story beyond the notes of the music themselves is actually quite a radical proposition for an opera. Les Enfants comes from, as you've already heard, a whole trilogy of operas called the Cocteau trilogy. And all of these 3 operas flip the idea that operas get turned into films. These are films which get turned into operas. With the first opera, Orphée, Orpheus, Glass takes Cocteau's film script and treats it as a libretto. In fact, he treats it as a verbatim libretto. So literally every single word that you see in the film, that's what you hear sung in the opera. With the next opera in the trilogy, La Belle et la Bête, The Beauty and the Beast, Glass essentially invented karaoke opera. So as in Orphée, the singers sing exactly the words of the film script verbatim, but this time the original film is screened for the audience behind the singers with the sound turned off. And Glass's score precisely times each syllable that the singers sing to coincide with the lips of the actors on the film. Les Enfants also takes its libretto directly from its film's original screenplay. Let's hear some of it. I'd like to invite Jennifer Davis, who's singing the role of Elizabeth, and Emily Edmonds, playing the role of Agathe, to join us. So I'm going to ask them to do something a little bit unusual. First, they're going to speak the lines of the original screenplay in this scene, and then we're going to hear them sing it. So in this scene, Elizabeth is visiting her friend Agathe's room, finding her in floods of tears. Now, Elizabeth thinks that she's crying because Agathe is in love with their friend Gérard. Take it away.
Mais voyons, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Qu'est-ce que tu as?
Je n'ai rien.
C'est la faute de Gérard, il t'a fait de la peine.
Mais non, laisse-moi.
Je ne partirai pas sans t'avoir consolée.
C'est impossible.
Diable, tu es amoureuse.
Je veux qu'on me laisse seule.
Raconte.
Non.
Raconte.
So now let's hear film turned into opera. So this is from the very beginning of the scene.
Mais voyons, qu'est-ce qui se passe? Qu'est-ce que tu as? Je n'ai rien, c'est la faute de Gérard, il t'a fait de la peine. Mais non, laisse-moi, je ne partirai pas sans te consoler. C'est impossible, diable, tu es amoureux, je veux qu'on me laisse seule. Raconte-moi, raconte.
So the pace at which they sing the words is really not that different to how they spoke them. And with lots of opera composers, the text we've just heard could have taken 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or in some cases, a lot longer. The music in the pianos, you notice, literally doesn't change chord, E minor all the way through. It doesn't tell the emotional story moment to moment. That's left to the singers. And yet, I hear in it a sense of foreboding, a sense of urgency. The pianos may not be changing harmony, but sometimes it seems like the singers are. One of Glass's early musical heroes as a student in Chicago was Charlie Parker, and he learned from bebop a way of hearing notes in melodies which don't seem to fit in the harmony, don't seem to fit in the harmony. He hears them as extensions of the harmony, and actually he makes a lot of use of this in all three of these operas, and especially in Les Enfants. So listen to Jennifer singing the words, Diable, tu es amoureuse, devil, you've fallen in love. We hear her surprise through the use of, well, a blue note. So this is figure 2, Laisse-moi.
Laisse-moi, je ne partirai pas sans te consoler. C'est impossible, diable, tu es amoureuse, je veux qu'on me laisse seule. Raconte-moi, raconte.
So let's go on. So in the next section of the scene, Agathe begins to confess that she is in love, but reveals that it is Paul, Elizabeth's brother, who she is in love with. So this is figure 3, Je l'aime.
Je l'aime, je l'adore, il m'aime, et je voudrais bien savoir de quel toit tu méprises. Mais si tu aimes, il faut qu'il t'épouse. Il faut l'épouser, dis-le, tu es si bonne. Mais si tu en es sûr, c'est impossible. Tu sais, Gérard est un garçon timide. Mais il ne s'agit pas de Gérard, je parle de Paul. En voilà une surprise, c'est drôle. Raconte vite, je l'ai adoré. Elle m'a promis une minute, je n'ose pas me louer. Mais depuis qu'il m'évite, c'est semblable. C'est très simple, je vais le consulter. Pour moi, il s'en avec tes liens.
Thank you very much, Jennifer and Emily. It's not just the libretto that Glass takes from the original film of Les Enfants. The sound world of the film was very interesting. There was no composer. All of the music on the soundtrack was taken from the works of Vivaldi. The exclusive use of Vivaldi in a film which is set in the mid-20th century brings, I think, a feeling of elegance, grandeur, but also a sense of coldness or distance and otherworldly element. One of the pieces of music which returns several times in the soundtrack is Bach's arrangement of Vivaldi Concerto, known at the time of the film as the Concerto for 4 Pianos by Bach. We're going to play you a short section from the slow movement. Sorry, we couldn't fit a 4th piano in, so you're 1 piano down. I think Glass possibly saw his own music reflected in that world of patterns, repetitions and changes, and decided that he too would use a multi-keyboard ensemble for Les Enfants. You are looking at the orchestra for Les Enfants. It's just scored for 3 pianos. That's it. Here's an absolutely stunning example of what he does with it. Oh, yeah, that's a good place to stop. Lovely. Very good. So these pieces were written in the 1990s, but Glass's relationship with the Cocteau films and French culture in general goes back a lot longer. As a student in Chicago in the 1950s, Glass saw these 3 Cocteau films over and over again at the Hyde Park Movie Theatre, which specialized in European films with subtitles. And later, after he left the Juilliard, Glass went to Paris to study with Nadia Boulanger, like Aaron Copland and Elliott Carter before him. Paris was an extraordinarily formative time for Glass. His basic technique as a composer was perfected in the classes with Boulanger. He pioneered his music of repetition and change, writing the incidental music for Play by Samuel Beckett, and he encountered Indian classical music through an eye-opening collaboration with Ravi Shankar. But meanwhile, I think the more sentimental side of French music, Poulenc, Auric, Jacques Brel, was rubbing off on him. And in Les Enfants, I hear that influence, however subconscious, coming through. Famous for not writing one conventional melody in his early hardcore phase of writing in the late 60s and 70s, I think with Les Enfants, we encounter a Philip Glass who still encourages us to listen to music in a different way, but also indulges us with moments of true end-of-pier romance. Thank you.
Tim, thank you very much indeed. And thank you also to our three wonderful pianists, Kate Shipway, Grant Green, James Hendry, and of course to Jennifer and Emily as well, who are on the Yetta Parker Young Artist Scheme here at the Royal Opera House, as all of the singers are in this production. Well, don't forget, if you are watching us online on our YouTube channel, you can get on Twitter as well and join in the conversation about the production. The hashtag is Les Enfants, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. But now we're going to welcome Tim and Javier back to have a bit of a discussion about the production, and we're also delighted to have here two principal Royal Ballet dancers, Edward Watson and Sinead Yanovsky. Please welcome them now.
Yes.
Hi, good to see you. So, where to start with your pie, into which you have all of these amazing elements? We should just point out, first of all, that we have dancers from the Royal Ballet. We also have contemporary dancers, and we have singers in the mix. Is that something that Philip Glass prescribed?
No.
Or is that your choice?
No, and I think it's probably interesting to kind of land how I ended up knowing this as a little bit of a background. I worked in New York, late 80s, beginning of the 90s, with a choreographer called Laura Dean. Laura Dean, dancers and musicians, very famously worked together at the time. They were together as well with Steve Reich, and in fact, drumming was created for Laura. I danced Laura's version of drumming, the original one. Now, so it meant that at that time in New York, there were the Battle of the Minimalists. And so we were on the band with Steve Reich, who actually would come and play for us and go on tour with us. And then Lucinda was pretty much the big defender of Philip, and she had performed herself in Einstein on the Beach and many others, and a lot of her music. And the music was, and her choreographies were very respectful of the patterns. It was patterns over layering. Anyway, it was something that after you have been through all those military service of the minimalist work, you kind of promise yourself never ever to touch a minimalist work in your life. So I had to grow out of that. So I came back and started doing my work with very massive, big scores. Because I was going to spend a lot of time on my own, so I was listening to all the stuff that I didn't listen when I was dancing for Laura, and somehow also at that time, it came to my attention the work of Susan Marshall,
who is the choreographer,
who is the co-author of the work. She collaborated with Philip, and she was very interesting. I knew Susan then because in the midst of all this cool 80s stuff, she was quirkily theatrical. And I found that very curious. And therefore, when I found out that they had collaborated in this, I was very curious because I wouldn't have thought that she would have been the logical choice to work. Now that I know the work, I understand why. So what she did, that after she finished her version of the work, she left the libretto for anybody like me to choreograph and direct, because it has to be choreographed and directed by the same person. So it is prescribed mostly by Susan.
Okay, but that's all kind of in the contemporary dance language, right?
Well, because it was how it was created. You can do at the moment it says you can do it whichever way you want. It just so happens that in the process of creating this, and she doesn't prescribe how many either.
Right.
Okay. So there is absolutely is like Mexican pharmacy. Nothing is prescribed.
And you can have as many dances as you want.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is it about the piece then that lends itself to having these different disciplines on stage? Why you've chosen to do that?
Because I like to make myself difficult.
Okay.
And because
is that true? That he likes to make life difficult for himself and everyone? No. What is it like for you two being on stage with dancers who come from a different, I suppose, discipline background, although...
Really feel like
do you want to just hold the microphone up?
Different backgrounds. We're all working from scratch on the same material, the same scenes, so we're just bringing what we have to the moment.
also, I think it's incredibly nourishing for any artist to work with other backgrounds and artists. And I find it very nourishing in many, many ways, not only watching them dance, but trying to morph a little bit towards their qualities. And, you know, they are amazing dancers. Yeah.
So
And there's to yours as well, because everybody's feeding from each other. There is something very particular, and I will explain how this is completely broken down. These are incredibly complex characters, and therefore just one side of that character does not fully explain it. The fracture of the mind of these people is something, and also very purposely, I wanted very different people in the room.
So each dancer, contemporary dancer, ballet dancer, and singer is representative of one person. So as in there's a trio of
there is four of each at one point. But for instance, and this is how it is. It's a mathematical equation, because I see people just go like, what? That, for instance, the character of Agathe, who is slightly simpler. She wears her heart on her sleeve, doesn't have that many faces. So she doesn't have as many doubles.
Okay. So we should probably lay out the story a little bit more clearly. I mean, we don't want to give away the ending. We never do with opera. But perhaps, Sinead, and Ed, you could just outline us the kind of two central characters and what happens with the love interest of Agathe, and who kind of comes in and disrupts in a way.
Shall we go together?
Well, we play brother and sister, who are sort of only know really each other and each other's space, one space.
In this room.
In this room.
Weirdly claustrophobic room.
A wall has been removed from as well, so there's one bedroom, one room. And from then, when influences from outside start to sort of creep in, when someone leaves for necessity or, you know, desire, then things change with us forever. It's never going to be the same. That one thing that they're sort of, the only thing they know is each other. When they start to know other things, it's when everything kind of falls to pieces, really.
Yes, right. It's totally
roundabout way, but yeah.
Incestuous, I was going to say, but also I seem to be the manager of
Elizabeth,
the calculating manager of the whole thing. And although Ed plays the victim, it's not really a victim because he's an accomplice.
He's part of the game. I'm not unwilling ever. We just change our.
So they create these peculiar games between them. The game that they have in this room, and then as they grow up and start to have love interest in a way outside of the two of them, what exactly do you do when it comes to Agathe? What does Elizabeth do to sort of get in the way of it all?
Well, I think it's quite a hard one because it's so weird. But but I think they can't stop living on their own, because that would be not living. That would be just, they had to go to the shops, they have to live a normal, and they have to sort of pretend they live a normal life. It's just that behind the closed doors, things might be a little different.
It's their normal, which they slowly realise isn't normal outside. And the more that idea that we shouldn't really be doing this anymore, changes stuff.
I think it's important to say, because we have to spell it out. This is about incest. And it really is about incest. There is no two ways about it. And the game is sex. And that's when they call it the game. And when they call it, I'm going to hypnotize you, or there's different names. Are there different pet names to what, if they don't put, and I think probably this is my attraction to the material, is that when you don't name it, it is not a crime. And when you name it, when people realize that on the outside they're starting to pass judgment, then it becomes incest, and therefore it's punishable and dangerous. Like everything, like abortion, like any stuff that when you put it a name. And this is what happens. At no point the word incest is used. But in the 21st century, I want to call it, and I want to show it. because up until the moment in which somebody passes that judgment, for me it was interesting to be able to start the process by putting the question out there. How did this start? It's not explained in the opera, it's not explained in the book. Did this start that at one point, for instance, this was my scenario, let's blame the mother always. It's that you know, was there at one point that this very dysfunctional woman just decided to put baby boy and baby girl in the bath and have the two of them together, and she went to have her date, and that became such a fun day that it continued happening until they were almost too big for that bathtub, and one thing rubbed against the other, and then at that time no one has actually called it an incest because that's all they knew, and that was the game.
Can I also, because obviously it's a piece that is very, very much about the specificity and the intricacies of the plot and these very particular characters and the reality of what's going on in their lives. There's another way of seeing it, that it's a work of abstraction in a sense. And there's a bit in Philip Glass's writings about Cocteau that he says this is ultimately, Cocteau's work is a work about creativity.
Yeah, I think that's right.
What do you understand by that, Tim? And
Well,
what
I
does he mean
think
by that?
it feels to me like what they create is an imaginary world for themselves, and actually they live a reality which they've completely created that's fictional, that doesn't really chime in with the rest of life outside them. And that reality that they've created for them is, in its own way, totally fascinating and quite beautiful. They have like a kind of chest of drawers, and in that in the drawer is all these different objects that Paul listed some of the objects that are in there, and they're things which are defined by no longer being used for what they were supposed to be used for. So a part of something, a handle from something, or a photo of somebody or whatever, and it's become almost like a sacred object that's part of their reality. And it seems to me that a lot of the piece is about the collision of their imaginary world that they created with the outside world, represented by each new character as they arrive, Gerard arriving, Agathe arriving, and there's a collision, and then they either get sucked into the world, in the case of Agathe and Gerard, or in the case of Michael, the person who marries Elizabeth, he sort of gets killed off, in a sense, by his encounter with it.
Yeah. And I'm curious then, have the rehearsals felt like they were about an exploration of creativity in quite an explicit way?
Well, you have to, and this is something about the particular process and why I made such selection of casting. I am 53, and I don't want to feel like the oldest person in the room. But it means that I want to be surrounded myself by very smart people that I can talk to, and therefore the interpretation of the work is. I just can't believe that I came out with my age on the live stream.
It's all right. I should have jumped in with, but you don't look a day older than 35.
Yeah. But you didn't.
I didn't. I'm sorry. I was so interested in where the sentence is going after that.
Is that pause that just crushed me? It is about being able to, the part of the development of the stuff is that this work is going to change when it's filtered through the eyes of people that are as smart as they are and everybody else, because the constant discussions of, well, I think that she would have done that, means that, okay, you do it because you're 1/4 of that stuff, and then we have as many different breaks. The part of the creativity is that I'm coming back to this world after having spent a lot of time doing theater, that I felt that this whole thing of like, I was always told to tell the story. You need to tell the story, you need to tell the story. And I feel it's like, but he's telling the story, it's written down. So I don't really understand what I'm doing. What aren't I supposed to do? And my interpretation of what the story is. And then, therefore, that's the creativity, because my vision of this is slightly different. My relationship with Cocteau is slightly more personal. My relationship with Cocteau is about his own obsessions. It is fascinating, which is something that a lot of people have researched. At the French church, in Notre Dame in Soho, there are all frescoes of Jean Cocteau, and a lot of people know. The gays know. And we go and visit religiously. The nuns hate us. but we go and visit and we see it. We have no interest in attending the mass or confessing to anything, not in Soho. But it is what is interesting about this obsession is that you don't see the figure of Christ anywhere. You see the feet. And the subversion is that you see a lot of the focus on the heads of the Roman soldiers, who all are blonde, blue eyes and look like Jean Marais.
Very interesting. I have to visit.
You have to, yeah.
Am I allowed?
Yeah, you are.
Great, amazing. So tell me a bit more about what it's been like in rehearsal then, Sinead, and that very sort of, in a way, psychological process of having to get into an aspect of a character.
Well, it's interesting because here I think how it works is very, very different to what I'm used to. So already was I had to adapt to a new way, which I find fascinating. Because what Javier does is that he puts your brain in the right place. He feeds you with information and thoughts and enough to get you motivated and creatively motivated. And then there is that frustration where you go, and now I have to come up with something and I don't know how to. And so it's been a very interesting process for me to be creative within the creation, but also it's a cooperation, which in some ways I've always had, but it's been more limited in the past, I think. Or maybe it's just the way it's worked out. I don't know, but this feels very much like just so communicative. But I've been very impressed by the fact that he can manipulate my brain so easily. I'm like, no, okay, you know. So,
do you also feel manipulated mentally?
Yeah, what's been nice about this is that with more than one person playing the same person, it has opened up communication. We have to talk about, are we saying the right thing with what we're discussing or what we're trying to create? So it makes you think not in the normal way you would. You have, influences not just from Javier or from the music or from the text, but from the other dancers all playing the same person, which I found really interesting, and I think it's really pushed a certain language.
Javier, I just want to ask you before we finish one more question about where we are right now in this room and about the design of the production.
Yeah, this is well. It is. What is interesting about the design is that we need to have a room in which is constantly morphing. Their imagination morphs the room. It is not a room with four walls. It is a room in which I think they decorate, redecorate, move it, and not move it. So there is a multi-use in which once we establish that this room is what we're seeing is through their eyes and not the reality. It's how it works, and also it means that we can have the multiplicity of moments. Our designer is Jean-Marc Puissant, who has come up with and collaborating with Tallinn, has come up with this rotating pivoted walls that has. This is probably the setup for what we consider their room. And after she gets married, and I know it's complicated, but after she gets married and they move to a bigger house, Paul finds a way to recreate his old room in the middle of the gallery of the second house, which is enormous, badly constructed. So there is a lot of, once we establish that whatever you see may or may not be real, then we are in a moment in which we concentrate on the characters and telling bits of the story. The video also, the element of the video, which was something that I insisted on having, was that I wanted for people to not to read the subtitles and to read as little as possible, so just to be able to feed some bits of information and part of the story, so your eyes are in this extraordinary group of people down here rather than up there. So it was something about what is it that always upset me about going to see opera, was that the amount of people that actually look up and not down.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to have a little bit more rehearsal, and we need to do some stage morphing as well. But please join me in thanking Edward and Sinead and Tim. So, stick with me. They're going to They're going to take the chairs away and
Great.
set for
And we're going to keep
what
chatting.
we're about
We're going to
to...
keep chatting while they move.
Yeah, what are we
Fabulous.
about to see now?
We are going to
What's
see
happening
scene
here?
11, which is Agathe in the room. Let me see how we explain this without out of context. It is Elizabeth has in one fit, which we don't know whether it's a game or not, Elizabeth has gone out and got herself a job. Okay. And she got herself a job in a fashion house. It's a very funny moment, funny comedy moment. And somehow, out of nowhere, very quickly, she decides to bring this girl that she meets, Agathe, to live in the house. The mother has died. Again, the biggest non-event of, for the opera world, in which death is something that we really do relish. This is the most non-event death ever. Mama est morte. That's what it says, and that's that. And I think it's a complete Jean Cocteau device to say, I need them to be orphan. So let's just kill the mother quickly. Because then it means that then they have complete permission to have this, to continue playing the game in the craziest manner ever for the rest of their lives, aside the fact that they have no money. So Agathe comes and moves. As soon as the mother dies, Agathe comes and moves into the dead mother's room. Paul is not very happy, but at the same time, we know later on that she manages to conquer him. He falls in love with Agathe, and Agathe falls in love with him, right under the nose of the sister, who's not aware she brought actually the trouble into herself. So once again, we are going to see, if we can put this bed in the right place. Let's just move it there.
Just to say, you're going to be working with three dancers
so
for this bit.
Edwards,
Edwards,
we're going to
Gemma Nixon and Clemmy Sales.
We're going to do exactly the same thing of how the three strands in which in this moment I'm working as the choreographer. Now I'm going to say that because it's kind of the political bit of this. Is the word choreographer and director the same? But it so happens.
I'm going to leave you. I'm going to get out of the way.
But it so happens that for some reason choreographers started getting paid less than directors, so I gave myself the title. But more importantly is that it is somehow the two roles are the same. And with choreographers, what we tend to do, we tend to write and direct at the same time. Choreography is a form of writing, and then the action with the singers has to be directed as you block a play. This all happens at the same time. So we have to do the three strands, which is that I am going to ask them to do what they normally do, the process in which we created this trio, which is a possibility of what has happened. Agathe is asked to leave the room at one point, but in her mind, she kind of wonders what would have happened if she would have stayed and the relationship would have actually flourished. Almost like when you meet somebody for the first time that you may fancy, and for about 5 seconds, you married him, you move into the house, you got 2 dogs, and then you break up. So it is a little bit of like that. That's how simple Agathe is at this moment. I have to say so that in the journey of this, she's going to end up being the person who's going to have to grow up the most. So this is what they do in silence, and this is how this version was created, and they're going to talk to each other as they do it. Good. Okay. And now we are going to see our three singers doing the scene as it is, following the script as it is written. Now, and you probably can explain the reason why they're going to mark.
Yeah, so they're gonna mark for this scene, kind of just so that we can really focus on the movement of it, really, and focus on what they're doing physically, rather than just listening to them, which is what tends to happen when they sing full out.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do the crossing with the.
Parce que j'ai installé Agathe dans la chambre de maman. Elle n'est pas faite pour les hôtels beaux.
La présence d'Agathe chez nous me déplaît.
On peut tenter, je ne vous dérange pas.
Si
Entre,
je disais du mal de vous,
tu vois Elisabeth, je vous gêne, j'en étais. Tu ne me gênes en rien. Il vaut mieux que je te connais, tu es trop faible pour me tenir bête. Tu profites de la faiblesse d'Agathe pour jouer les enfants. Laisse, je ne laisserai pas Agathe devenir ta victime. Il admet le monstre a trouvé sa victime.
est-ce que vous allez me laisser dormir?
Allez, va te coucher et ne pleure pas dans ta chambre. C'est notre style, il faut s'y faire. Allez, couche-toi et dors. Paul, qu'est-ce que tu as contre Agathe?
Elle m'empêche de vivre, de respirer, de jouer le jeu.
Nous ne jouons plus jamais au jeu.
C'est bien de ta faute.
J'ai dû apprendre à travailler, à remuer, à sortir.
Justement,
Paul, mon chéri, tiens, je vais m'étendre et nous allons jouer au jeu.
je me suis trop habitué à jouer seul.
Écoute,
Non,
si, écoute. Il y a un grand qui est le temps de la destruction. 50 grands prêtres le dirigent. 4 pénètrent dans les saints des saints. 1000 et 1000 esclaves y travaillent et aucun d'eux n'a le droit de dire ce qu'il a vu.
zut, et zut, et zut. Je ne comprends rien, ni la contente, ni à ce qui nous arrive. Je veux dormir, je veux dormir.
Good, great. So let's get you let's get you the mic while I explain what happens now. So I work with them in one session or a couple of sessions to get this, and I work with them in a couple of sessions with them, and then they come into the room together. And inevitably, when you put the two layers one in front of the other, you start finding what is the most logical, which is almost like is the word couture. You just have to keep making it to order until it fits, and to balance the picture in which the six characters, the six people, three characters can coexist. So it means that in the midst of all this, there is going to be editing and re-editing and reblocking. So when we see now the scene together, you're going to see a slight variations, which is all about sidelining. I don't want to bore you with that, but there is a lot of stuff about every angle being somehow interesting. And I like to work on a 360 degree angle and different ways that you see at the same event. And it's exactly the same thing with them. There is a couple of editing moments that they had to happen that will be quite apparent to you. So this is now the scene with the singers and the dancers.
Je trouve que tu as été bien vite en besogne.
Pourquoi? Parce que j'ai installé Agathe dans la chambre de maman. Elle n'est pas faite pour les autres épargnes.
La présence d'Agathe chez nous me déplaît.
On peut entrer, je ne vois tellement je passe.
Si
Entrez,
je disais du mal de vous,
tu vois Elisabeth, je vous gêne, j'en étais sûre. Tu ne me gênes rien, il vaut mieux que je m'en aille.
allez rester seul pareil même.
Je te connais, t'es trop faible pour battre les têtes. Tu profites de la faiblesse d'Agathe pour jouer les enfants. Laisse, je ne laisserai pas Agathe devenir ta victime.
Et si elle aime être victime,
Il admet le monstre a trouvé sa victime.
est-ce que vous allez me laisser dormir?
Allez, va-t'en coucher, tu ne pleuras pas dans ta chambre. C'est notre style, un faux effet. Allez, couche-toi et dors. Qu'est-ce que tu comptes, Agathe?
Elle m'empêche de vivre, de respirer, de jouer le jeu.
Nous ne jouons plus jamais au jeu.
C'est bien de ta faute.
J'ai dû apprendre à travailler, à aimer, à sortir.
Justement,
Oh, mon chéri, tiens, je vais m'étendre et nous allons jouer au jeu.
je me suis trop habitué à jouer seul.
Écoute,
Non,
si, écoute. Il est en moi rendu qui est le temps de la destruction. 50 grands prêtres le dirigent, 4 pénètrent dans les seins des saints. 1000 et 1000 esclaves y travaillent et aucun d'eux n'a le droit de dire ce qu'il avait.
zut, je ne comprends rien, il y a tant, il y a ce qui nous arrive. Je veux dormir, je veux dormir.
Great. Thank you.
Extraordinary the way that it kind of collapses in again at the end of that scene. Can't wait to see it
Thank
at
you.
the Barbican, 27th to 29th of January. Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much to everyone who's been joining us on a live stream tonight and to the audience here. And thank you also to everyone who's taken part in tonight's Insight event. To our singers, Julia Nodge, Jennifer Davis and Emily Edmonds. To Kate Shipway, James Hendry and Grant Green on pianos. To our dancers, Edward Watson and Sinead Yanovsky from the Royal Ballet. To Gemma Nixon, Clemis Feos, Jonathan Goddard, Thomasin Gulgech, and of course to Timothy Burke and to Javier De Frutos. Javier, you're absolutely right. It's an awful lot of people on stage, isn't it? From everyone here at the Royal Opera House, good night.